I was in the garage that Saturday morning, the air cool and sharp with the smell of sawdust and motor oil. My hands moved over the workbench, sanding down a piece of oak I'd been shaping into a shelf for weeks, a project I'd started for Sarah, something to fill the empty wall in our living room. The rhythmic scrape of sandpaper against wood steadied me, gave me a focus I'd been missing lately. I'd always found peace in building things, piecing them together until they made sense. Lately, though, nothing seemed to fit. Not the shelf, not us. Sarah was out, gone to Lisa's place for one of their coffee and catch-up mornings. They'd been friends since college, thick as thieves, and I liked that she had Lisa to lean on when my late nights at the firm kept me away. I pictured her there now, perched on Lisa's couch, laughing over some story about her latest PR campaign, her dark hair catching the sunlight through their big bay window. It was a comforting image, one I'd held onto through the rough patches, the canceled dinners, the quiet evenings where we barely spoke. We'd been drifting, sure, but I thought we'd find our way back. We always had. I brushed the dust off my hands and stepped inside, the house quiet except for the hum of the fridge. It was almost noon. Sarah would be home soon, maybe with a bag of pastries from that bakery Lisa loved. I'd planned a lazy day for us. Lunch on the patio, a movie later, just something to close the gap that had been growing between us. I set the kettle on, thinking I'd surprise her with tea when she walked in, and pulled out my phone to check the time. That's when it buzzed, Lisa's name lighting up the screen. I frowned. Lisa didn't call me much, maybe a quick hello at a barbecue or a text about plans, but never out of the blue like this. I answered, leaning against the counter. "Hey, Lisa. Everything okay?" Her voice came through shaky, clipped, like she was holding something back. "Mark, can you come over? Now. I need to talk to you." My chest tightened, a flicker of unease sparking up my spine. "Is Sarah all right? Did something happen?" "She's fine," Lisa said, her words too quick, too hollow. "But you need to hear this from me. Please, just come to the house." The line went dead before I could push for more. I stood there, the phone still warm in my hand, the kettle starting to whistle behind me. My mind raced. Accident? Fight. But Lisa's tone wasn't panic. It was something else, something heavy and personal. I grabbed my keys, my jacket, and headed out, the tea forgotten, the shelf half finished on the bench. The drive to Lisa's place was a blur, the streets familiar but distant, my thoughts spinning too fast to catch. She lived 10 minutes away, a tidy little house with a red door and a garden Ethan kept meticulous. Ethan, her husband, a quiet guy, an accountant who liked his beer and his golf. We'd all hung out plenty, dinners, game nights, and I'd always thought they were solid. But now, that solidity felt shaky, like a foundation I hadn't checked for cracks. I pulled up, the red door glaring at me under the midday sun, and Lisa was already outside, pacing the porch in her sweats, her blonde hair yanked back in a messy bun. She looked up as I got out, her face pale, her eyes red and swollen. "Mark," she said, her voice breaking as I climbed the steps. "Thank God you're here. What's going on?" I asked, stopping short, my hands shoving into my pockets to keep them still. "Where's Sarah?" "She left an hour ago," Lisa said, wrapping her arms around herself. But I couldn't wait. I had to tell you. "Tell me what?" My voice came out sharper than I meant, the unease turning into a steady drumbeat in my chest. She took a deep breath, her eyes locking onto mine, and I saw it. Regret. Anger, something raw and jagged. "Last night, Sarah was here. She came over while I was working the late shift. Ethan was home. I got back early, unexpected delay, and I found them. In our bed, Mark. Together." The words hit me slow, each one sinking in like a weight dropping through water. I stared at her, my mind scrambling to make sense of it, to push it away. "No," I said flat and firm. "You're wrong. That's not Sarah." "I wish I was," Lisa said, her voice trembling, tears spilling over. I confronted them. Ethan admitted it, said it's been going on for weeks. "Sarah begged me not to tell you, said it was a mistake, but I saw them, Mark. I saw her with my husband." The porch tilted under me, the red door blurring at the edges. Weeks. Not some stranger on a plane, but Ethan, Lisa's Ethan, in their home, with my wife. I took a step back, my breath shallow, the world narrowing to the pounding in my ears. "Why are you telling me this?" I asked, my voice hoarse, barely mine. "Because you're not the only one she betrayed," Lisa said, her gaze steady despite the tears. And you deserve to know. I turned away, my hands clenching into fists, the air too thick to breathe. Sarah, my Sarah, laughing with Ethan, tangled in sheets that weren't ours, while I'd been sanding wood for her shelf. The betrayal wasn't distant, wasn't mid-flight, it was here, close, in a house I'd walked into a dozen times. I drove home, the road a haze, my chest hollowed out, knowing she'd walk through our doors soon, smiling like nothing had happened. And I'd be waiting. I sat in the living room, the silence pressing down on me like a weight I couldn't shift. The drive back from Lisa's had blurred into a mess of red lights and half-formed thoughts. But now, parked in the armchair, I felt every second stretch out, sharp, relentless. My hands gripped the armrests, the fabric rough under my palms, grounding me while my mind spun. Lisa's words kept echoing, Sarah and Ethan, in their bed, for weeks. Not some stranger, not a fleeting lapse, but Ethan, quiet, dependable Ethan, someone I'd shared beers with, laughed with, trusted. And Sarah, my wife, choosing him, choosing their home over ours. I tried to piece it together, to find the edges of it. When had it started? The late nights she'd blamed on work, the weekends she'd spent helping Lisa with some vague project, had it all been lies? I saw her face in my head, smiling over coffee at their kitchen table, Ethan pouring her a cup, their hands brushing when I wasn't looking. The images piled up, vivid and sickening, her hair tangled on his pillow, her laugh filling their room, the same laugh I thought was mine. My chest tightened, a dull ache spreading, but I couldn't stop it, couldn't unsee what Lisa had laid bare. The shelf in the garage flashed through my mind, hours I'd spent sanding it, shaping it for her, while she'd been somewhere else, with him. I'd been building something for us, and she'd been tearing it apart, piece by piece, in a house I'd walked into without a second thought. The betrayal wasn't just the act, it was the closeness of it, the way it wove through our lives, through people I'd called friends. I heard her car then, the familiar crunch of tires on the driveway pulling me back. My pulse kicked up, a steady thrum in my ears, and I stayed where I was, rooted to the chair, waiting. The door opened, and she stepped in, Sarah, her purse slung over her shoulder, a paper bag from the bakery in her hand. She kicked off her shoes, her movements easy, casual, like any other day. Hey, she called, her voice light, warm. Lisa says hi. Brought some croissants, thought we could have them with lunch. She stopped when she saw me, her smile faltering, the bag crinkling as her grip tightened. Mark? Why are you sitting in the dark? I stood, slow and deliberate, my shadow stretching across the floor toward her. How was Lisa's? I asked, keeping my voice even, though it took everything to hold it steady. She tilted her head, a flicker of confusion crossing her face. Fine. Same as always, coffee, gossip. You okay? You look off. Funny you'd say that, I said, stepping closer, the air between us thickening. Because I was just there. With Lisa. Her eyes widened, just a fraction, but I caught it, the first crack in her calm. Oh, she said, setting the bag on the table, her fingers lingering there. What did she want? She told me something, I went on, watching her, every shift, every breath. About you. And Ethan. Her face froze, the color draining out, her hand stilling on the bag. Ethan, she said, her voice pitching up, too bright. What about him? Don't, I said, my tone dropping, hard and cold now. Don't pretend, Sarah. Lisa saw you last night, in their bed. She said it's been weeks. Tell me she's wrong. She stared at me, her lips parting, then closing, her breath coming faster. Mark, it's not, she's exaggerating. It was nothing. A stupid moment, that's all. A moment. I took another step, close enough to see the panic flickering in her eyes. Weeks isn't a moment, isn't nothing. You were in their house, our friend's house, while I was here, waiting for you. It wasn't like that. She snapped, her voice rising, her hands lifting like she could push the truth away. It just happened. I didn't plan it. Ethan and I, we were talking, and it got out of hand. I stopped it, Mark. I swear I did. Stopped it. I laughed, a bitter, hollow sound that echoed in the room. Lisa walked in on you. In their bed. You didn't stop anything until you got caught. Her hands dropped, trembling now, tears welling up. I didn't mean for it to go that far. I was lonely, you're always working, and Ethan was there, listening. It was a mistake, a horrible mistake. Lonely, I repeated, the word tasting like ash. So you turned to him? To Lisa's husband? You think that makes it better? I'm not saying it does, she cried, her voice breaking. I messed up, I know I did. But it's over. I told him last night it's done. Over. I stared at her, the woman I'd loved, trusted, built a life with, standing there like a stranger. You don't get to decide that, Sarah. You betrayed me. You betrayed Lisa. And you think it's over fixes it? She reached for me, her fingers brushing my arm, but I pulled back, the contact jarring. Please, Mark, she whispered, tears spilling over. I love you. I didn't want this. I turned away, my chest heaving, the room too small to hold everything crashing through me. Love doesn't do this, I said, my voice low, ragged. Love doesn't lie to my face while I'm sanding a shelf for you. She sobbed behind me, a soft, broken sound, but I didn't look back. I walked to the window, staring out at the yard, the grass I'd mowed last week, the life I'd thought was ours. It was all unraveling now, thread by thread, and I didn't know how to stop it, or if I even wanted to. The silence after that first clash hung heavy, like a storm cloud ready to break. Sarah stood there by the table, her sobs quieting into shaky breaths, her hands clutching the edge of the bakery bag like it could anchor her. I stayed by the window, the glass cool against my palm, staring out at the yard but seeing nothing, just the dark swirl of her words replaying in my head. A mistake. Lonely. It's over. They didn't fit, didn't explain the weeks of lies, the betrayal in a house I'd trusted. I couldn't let it sit there, festering. I needed more, needed her to face it, all of it. I turned, slow, my boots thudding against the hardwood, and she flinched at the sound, her eyes darting up to meet mine. We're not done, I said, my voice low, steady, but carrying a fire I couldn't tamp down. You don't get to cry and think that's enough. She straightened, wiping her face, her jaw tightening. What do you want me to say, Mark? I told you it was a mistake. I'm sorry, I'm so sorry. What else is there? Sorry doesn't cut it. I snapped, stepping closer, the space between us shrinking fast. You didn't just trip and fall into Ethan's bed. You chose him, Lisa's husband, in their house, for weeks. How do you even start that? How do you look at me every day and hide it? Her eyes flashed, a mix of guilt and defiance. I didn't hide it every day. It wasn't like that. It started small, talking, venting. You got me, Mark. You've been so wrapped up in your work, and I felt invisible. It wasn't planned. It just happened. Just happened. I laughed, sharp and bitter, the sound cutting through the room. You don't just happen to sleep with your best friend's husband. You don't just happen to sneak around behind my back. That's not an accident, Sarah. That's you deciding I wasn't worth the truth. That's not true, she shouted, her voice rising, her hands balling into fists. I never decided you weren't worth it. I was weak, okay? I messed up, I know I did, but it wasn't about you. It was about me, feeling lost, needing something. Needing something? I took another step, my chest heaving now, the anger boiling over. You needed Ethan? In their bed? You think that makes it better, that it's about you and not us? I was here, Sarah, here, building a shelf for you, waiting for you to come home, while you were with him. I know, she cried, her voice cracking, tears streaming down her face. I know how it looks, how it feels. I hate myself for it, Mark. I'd take it back if I could. I'd erase every second of it. Then why didn't you stop? I yelled, my control slipping, the words tearing out of me. Weeks, Sarah? You had weeks to walk away, to tell me, to tell Lisa. But you kept going, kept lying, until she caught you. What kind of person does that? She staggered back, her hands flying up to her face, sobs shaking her shoulders. I don't know, she choked out. I don't know who I am anymore. I kept thinking I'd end it, that it'd fade out, but it didn't. And then last night, Lisa walked in, and I saw her face. I saw what I'd done to her, to you. I ended it then, I swear. Too late, I said, my voice dropping, cold and hard now. You don't get credit for ending it when you're caught. You broke everything. Us, them, all of it. And you think I ended it fixes that. No, she sobbed, stepping toward me, her hands reaching out. I don't think it fixes anything. I just want you to see I'm not. I'm not evil, Mark. I'm not trying to destroy you. I love you, I've always loved you. Love. I grabbed the coffee mug from the table, the one I'd poured that morning, still sitting there, cold, and hurled it against the wall. It shattered, ceramic shards scattering across the floor, the sound loud and final. She jumping back, her eyes wide with shock. That's not love, I said, my voice trembling raw. Love doesn't do this. She stared at the mess, then at me, her face crumpling. I didn't mean, she whispered, her voice barely audible. I didn't mean any of this. But you did it, I said, turning away, my hands shaking, the anger draining into something heavy, hollow. You did it anyway. She didn't move, didn't speak, just stood there, crying softly, the broken mug a mirror to what we'd become. I walked to the couch, sinking into it, my head in my hands. The fight wasn't over, it was still burning in me, shifting, looking for a way out. I couldn't look at her, couldn't stand the sight of her tears when they didn't change what she'd done. The room felt too small, too full of us, of what we'd lost, and I knew this wasn't the end. Not yet. The air in the house felt stale after that, thick with the echoes of her sobs and the crash of that mug against the wall. I stayed on the couch long after she'd retreated to the bedroom, the darkness wrapping around me, my hands still trembling from the fury I'd let loose. Sarah's words kept circling, mistake, lonely, love, but they didn't soothe. They just fueled it, stoking a fire I hadn't known I could carry. I wasn't a cruel man. I'd spent my life building things, not breaking them, but what she'd done, with Ethan and Lisa's home, it demanded something. I couldn't just sit here. I needed her to feel it too. Morning came gray and quiet, the light creeping through the blinds, casting slanted shadows across the living room. She was still asleep, or pretending to be, when I got up, my body stiff from the night on the couch. I didn't wake her. Didn't want her excuses, her tears, not yet. Instead, I moved with purpose, a plan forming sharp and clear in my mind. I went to the kitchen, where her travel mug sat on the counter, bright red, chipped from years of use, the one she took everywhere. It was hers, a piece of her daily life, something she'd miss. I grabbed it, walked to the sink, and smashed it against the edge, hard, deliberate. The ceramic cracked, splintering into jagged pieces that clattered into the basin, the sound harsh and satisfying. She'd hear it later, see it, and know. But that wasn't enough. I needed something deeper, something that'd linger. I headed to the bedroom, stepping quiet over the creak in the floor, and opened her dresser. There they were, her journals, a stack of leather-bound books she'd kept since we met. She poured everything into them, trips we'd taken, dreams she'd had, little sketches of our life together. I'd always loved that about her, the way she held on to moments I'd let slip. Now, those pages mocked me, a record of a marriage she'd thrown away. I pulled the top one out, flipped it open, dates, doodles, her handwriting spilling across the lines, and tore the first page free, slow and steady, the rip slicing through the stillness. She stirred then, her voice groggy from the bed. "Mark? What are you doing?" I didn't look at her, just kept going, tearing another page, then another, letting them flutter to the floor like leaves. "What does it look like?" I said, my voice steady, cold. "I'm fixing things." "Stop it," she cried, scrambling out of bed, her bare feet hitting the floor as she lunged for the journal. "Those are mine, don't." I held it out of reach, meeting her eyes for the first time since last night. They were wide, panicked, glistening with fresh tears. "Yours," I said, tearing one more page, letting it drift down. "Like our marriage was yours? Like Ethan was yours to take." "That's not fair," she shouted, grabbing at my arm, but I stepped back, dropping the journal onto the dresser, half its pages gone. "You can't do this. It's not the same." "It's exactly the same," I said, my voice low, cutting. "You took something from me from Lisa. Now I'm taking something from you." She sank to her knees, gathering the torn pages, her hands shaking. "I get it. I hurt you, but this won't undo it." "No," I agreed, turning away, my chest tight with a strange mix of triumph and emptiness. "But it feels right." I didn't stop there. I went to the closet, pulled out her favorite scarf, the soft blue one she'd worn on our first date, the one she draped over her shoulders when she needed comfort. I took it to the kitchen, grabbed scissors from the drawer, and cut it clean in two, the fabric fraying under the blades. She followed me, her gasp sharp behind me, but I didn't turn. I dropped the pieces on the counter, right next to the smashed mug, a silent message she couldn't miss. "Mark, please," she begged, her voice raw, trembling. "Don't destroy everything. I know I messed up. I'll do anything to fix it." "You can't fix it," I said, facing her now, my hands steady despite the storm inside. "You broke us, Sarah. You broke Lisa's life too. This is what's left." She stared at the scarf, the mug, the scattered pages peeking from the bedroom, and her face crumpled, a sob tearing loose. "I didn't mean to lose you," she said, barely audible. "I didn't mean any of this." I looked at her, this woman I'd loved, who'd shared my bed, my dreams, and felt the weight of her betrayal settle deeper. "But you did," I said, my voice flat, final. And now you live with it. I walked past her, out to the garage, the air cool against my face, the half-finished shelf staring back at me. I'd hurt her, not with my hands, but with the things she'd held close, the way she'd hurt me with Ethan. It wasn't enough to erase what she'd done, wasn't enough to fill the hole she'd left, but it was mine, a mark I'd made, a piece of myself I'd taken back. The fire in me wasn't gone, but it was quieter now, smoldering, waiting for what came next. The garage became my refuge after that morning, the air thick with sawdust and the hum of my own breathing. I stayed out there for hours, sanding the shelf I'd started for her, my hands moving over the wood like it could smooth out the mess inside me. The broken mug, the torn journals, the scarf in pieces, they sat heavy in my chest, not as victories, but as markers of how far we'd fallen. Sarah's sobs had faded behind the bedroom door, and the house felt like a stranger's now, quiet, hollow, a shell of what it had been. I couldn't avoid her forever, though. We had to finish this, one way or another. Night fell slow, the sky turning a bruised purple through the garage window. I put the sandpaper down, wiped my hands on my jeans, and went inside. The living room was dim, the only light spilling from the kitchen where she stood, staring at the counter, her scarf still there, split in two, the mug shards swept into a neat pile. She didn't look up as I stepped in, just kept her eyes on the wreckage, her shoulders slumped, her hair falling loose around her face. I leaned against the doorway, crossing my arms, the silence stretching between us until it hurt. "We can't keep doing this," I said, my voice low, worn from the day. "Pretending it's not over." She flinched, her hands tightening on the counter's edge, then turned to face me. Her eyes were red, swollen, but steady, searching mine like she could find something to hold on to. "I don't want it to be over," she said, her voice soft, fraying at the edges. "I know I ruined us, Mark. I know what I did, with Ethan, with everything, but I love you. Doesn't that mean anything?" I looked at her, really looked, past the tears, past the woman I'd married, and saw the truth staring back. "It meant everything," I said, slow, measured, each word pulling up the ache I'd buried. 10 years, Sarah. 10 years of loving you, trusting you. And you took that, threw it away for him for weeks in their house. Love's not enough to fix that." She nodded, just once, her lips trembling. I hate myself for it. Every time I close my eyes, I see Lisa's face when she walked in, hear your voice last night. I'd give anything to erase it, to go back. "I believe you hate it," I said, stepping closer, the floor cold under my boots. "But that doesn't change what's done. I can't look at you without seeing him, without wondering what else you hid. That's not a life I can live." Her breath hitched, a sob breaking loose, but she didn't argue, just stood there, tears slipping down her cheeks. "What do we do then?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. "Where do we go from here?" I exhaled, long and slow, the weight in my chest shifting, not lifting, but settling into something I could carry. "I'm leaving," I said, the words forming solid as I spoke them. "Not tonight, but soon. I'll pack up, find somewhere new. We're done, Sarah." She froze, her eyes widening, then softening with a quiet resignation. "Where will you go?" "Doesn't matter," I said, shrugging, the future a blank slate I hadn't drawn yet. "Somewhere I can start over, somewhere that's mine, not ours." She reached for the scarf, her fingers brushing the frayed edge, and her voice cracked. "I didn't think it'd end like this. I thought we were stronger." "So did I admitted, my throat tightening, the sadness welling up now, soft and deep. "But you broke that. With Ethan, with the lies, you broke it, and I can't rebuild it. Not with you." She nodded again, slower this time, her hands falling to her sides. "I'll always love you, Mark. Even after this, even if you walk away." I swallowed hard, the words hitting me, stirring up the old ache of what we'd had. "I loved you too," I said, quieter now, almost to myself. "But I can't anymore." I turned, heading back to the living room, sinking into the couch where I'd spent the night. She didn't follow, just stayed there, a shadow in the kitchen light, her quiet crying fading into the background. I sat, staring at the ceiling, letting it all wash over me, the shock of Lisa's call, the rage that had burned through me, the revenge I'd taken. It had stripped me bare, left me raw, but it had also cleared the fog. I couldn't stay here, tethered to a life that wasn't mine anymore. The shelf in the garage came to mind, unfinished, waiting. I'd take it with me, wherever I went, finish it for myself. Not for her, not for us, just for me, a piece to build on. The anger was still there, a dull ember, but the sadness was louder now, mingling with something else, something small, fragile, like the first hint of light after a long night. I'd leave, start fresh, find a way to breathe again. This wasn't the end I'd wanted, but it was the one I'd choose. The days after that last talk blurred into a strange rhythm, packing boxes, sorting through a decade of our life, moving like I was on autopilot. Sarah kept to herself, her presence a whisper in the house, keys dingling as she left for work, the faint clink of dishes when she thought I wasn't listening. We didn't fight, didn't revisit the wreckage, just let the silence do its work, carving out the space I needed to leave. I filled a truck with what was mine: clothes, books, my tools, that unfinished shelf from the garage. The rest, our couch, the kitchen table, her journals, I left behind, relics of a past I couldn't carry. I drove north on a Tuesday, the sky heavy with clouds, the city fading in my rear view until it was just a smudge on the horizon. I'd found a place online, a small cabin an hour out, tucked by a river, all wood and quiet. It wasn't much, but it was mine, a clean slate I could build on. Sarah watched me go from the porch, her arms crossed, her face unreadable. "Take care, Mark," she'd said, her voice thin, a thread of something regret, maybe, woven through it. I nodded, climbed into the truck, and didn't look back. The road stretched ahead, empty and open, and I let it pull me away. The cabin smelled of pine when I got there, the air crisp, the river murmuring outside like a steady heartbeat. I unloaded my things slow, deliberate, set the shelf against a wall, stacked my books on a rickety table, hung a jacket by the door. That first night, I sat on the porch with a beer, the cold bottle sweating in my hand, watching the water catch the last light. My mind wandered back: Lisa's call, Sarah's tears, the mug shattering, the scarf in pieces. It played like a film I couldn't stop, each frame sharp, heavy with what I'd lost. What had it taught me? I turned it over, letting the river's sound fill the quiet. Trust, maybe, how fragile it was, how quick it could crack when someone stepped over a line. Sarah hadn't just cheated with Ethan. She'd broken a bond that ran deeper, ours, Lisa's, the trust between friends. I'd missed the signs, too caught up in my own world, sanding wood while she slipped away. But I'd learned something harder: love wasn't a shield. It could bend, break, leave you standing in the rubble wondering how you'd missed the fall. I didn't hate her, not anymore. The anger had cooled, leaving a sadness I could live with, a quiet ache that'd fade in time. She'd find her way, maybe fix things with Lisa, maybe not, but that wasn't my story now. I'd taken my revenge, torn her journals, cut her scarf, smashed her mug, not to destroy her, but to mark the end, to claim something back. It hadn't healed me, but it had steadied me, given me ground to stand on when everything else crumbled. The river stretched out, endless and calm, and I felt it, a shift, small but real. I'd build here, not just the shelf, but a life, one piece at a time, no rush, no blueprint I had to follow. I'd finish that oak slab, hang it on the wall, maybe carve something new, something mine, not ours. The thought settled in, warm and solid, like the first nail in a fresh frame. I'd work again, sketch designs for clients, but I'd keep space for myself, time by the water, nights under the stars, a quiet I hadn't known I needed. The beer was empty now, the bottle cool against my palm. I stood, stretching, the porch creaking under my weight, and looked out at the horizon, the clouds parting, a sliver of moon peeking through. What was next? I didn't have it all figured out, couldn't see the full shape of it yet, but that was okay. Maybe I'd fish the river, learn its currents, or drive into town, meet faces that didn't carry our past. Maybe I'd call old buddies, rebuild ties I'd let slip. Or maybe I'd just sit here, night after night, letting the solitude teach me what I'd missed in the noise. The betrayal had undone me, left me raw, but it hadn't finished me. It had pushed me here, to this cabin, this river, this chance to start over. I walked inside, the door shutting soft behind me, and grabbed my sketch pad from the box. I flipped it open, drew a single line, straight, simple, and paused. The rest would come in time. Sarah, Ethan, the house, the lies, they were behind me now, fading into the dusk. Ahead was something new, something I'd shape myself, and as I sat there, pencil in hand, I felt it, hope, faint but growing, lighting the way forward.